Welcome back, YouTube. Today is the Cleric, the last class in our Archetype theory crafting series. So let's just jump right into it. So the Cleric, I think, is going to be an interesting study, really. Because when you think of Cleric, I think of a primary healer, maybe buffs and heals, protection or shields. You know, I'm kind of combining Clerics I played in tabletops, Clerics in various role-playing games online, as well as, you know, the main one, Priest from WoW. Kind of gives off Cleric vibes to me. So my experience with it is that you could make the Cleric be close quarters up front, and they do okay damage, but they could buff and heal as well. Or you could play your Cleric a little more back of the line, and you heal and buff support more effectively to a higher degree, as well as just kind of remove maybe you live a little longer because you're away from the fight. I know a lot of Clerics that play them as like Cleric fighters, you know, heavy armor, shields, hammers, and they jump up front and they do the Cleric thing and they smash and bash and lay on hands. So it's really interesting when it comes to how to tweak a Cleric in an MMORPG so that it will not only be able to fill that healing role, which we know that Stephen had said that, you know, anybody who augments, so it takes a secondary class, creates an archetype with Cleric, while they'll be able to heal, they will not replace a full-blown healer. Now, when he said that, I'm assuming that a full healer or a healer main is really just going to be a Cleric primary. So you got kind of 8 play styles for your Cleric primary. I would like to see another class potentially in the future, or something that also heals, maybe in a slightly different way, because then that would give us 2 classes and 16 archetypes to pick from. You know how big I am in archetype identity and play styles and play loops, so I would really like to see that. But we don't. Right now it's the Cleric. One of the big things that's going to come up throughout this video and probably in discussion is the idea of a battle res, or which stands for battle resurrection. The ability to bring somebody back to life in a battle, big in a lot of games. However, I feel like that's like the ultimate healing ability, the ultimate divine ability, right? To bring somebody back to life. So I don't think all of the Cleric archetypes should be able to necessarily bring somebody straight back to life with no repercussion. I think there should be maybe some of the archetypes that lean heavier into protection. So maybe they do like a invulnerability period of time on the tank or somebody, because that would essentially bring them back to life or protect them from dying in the first place. And then maybe you can have them all being able to bring people back to life outside of battle. I think the in-battle battle res should be limited to maybe 2 archetypes. I know, if it's limited, then maybe those archetypes are the quote-unquote meta. So I know this might not work well the way I'm thinking about it, but it's just my personal preference, you know. Maybe I can prevent people from dying at all. Then there's the bring them back during battle. Maybe there's a bring them back to battle, but only for X amount of time, and then they die again. And you can bring them back. It just depends a lot on like durability, effectiveness of a battle res. You know, should it take a long time because that's a really high reward. It's really rewarding to be able to bring your tank or your DPS back in the middle of a battle. So I feel like it should be something that takes a long time, or should drain a lot of mana, or something like that. Yeah, I know doing it once per battle, or maybe twice in a long battle, seems like a good enough restriction. I don't know, it's just like in D&D, it's a lot bigger of a fucking deal to bring somebody back to life, right? Because you're fighting the forces. Now in an MMORPG, taking away that ability could make people feel less powerful if they are the healer class, but it could also take away the chance to turn the tides of a big battle, turn the tides of a PvP, you know, a gank, turn those tides by resurrecting the guy they ganked. It could turn the tides of a big giant raid, you know. So maybe my thoughts and my feelings on this are misplaced. Maybe they make more sense in D&D, but they don't make so much sense in an MMORPG. So while we go through these classes, I'll have suggestions on maybe how they could resurrect, if it's slightly different. I think that battle resurrection, especially with having one healer with 8 different playstyles or archetypes, I think that's a really cool conversation. Instead of just letting every single one of them bring back a battle res, while I don't like it flavor-wise, maybe it makes the most sense so that there's not a meta archetype. Maybe by allowing them all to do it, you would make them all viable. But have the conversation down below for me in the comments, okay? Alright, so let's jump into the Scryer. So the Scryer is where your Cleric's primary and Bard is secondary. Now, I had a lot of ideas for this. It was, how do you play the Cleric, the healer, the support, in with a Bard who is another support, but is referenced as a tactical support. So how do you kind of combine the idea of tactics and positioning with a healer? And a Scryer is known for fortune telling. So I was like, well, okay, so what if we base the kit around a crystal ball? Maybe that crystal ball is able to be maneuvered around the battlefield, letting you cast spells from where the crystal ball is, or maybe you can set the crystal ball in a spot and put a spell in it. So maybe you could cast your heal or your buff on the crystal ball. Then there is a delay. Let's say it's 5 seconds, let's say it's 10 seconds, whatever number they could come up with that works well for the game. But the longer the delay, so if I cast it and let's say it's 10-second delay, if I let it go the full 10 seconds, there's a significant increase in the buff or the heal. If I need to cast it early, 5 seconds, 4 seconds, 3 seconds, 7 seconds, right? It's scaled per second delayed. And the idea there is that I'm predicting that I'm going to need to heal right there, kind of playing into the Scryer, right? The fortune telling. I'm predicting that I'm going to heal right there or buff right there or whatever in 10 seconds. So if I get it right and I can hold out to that 10 seconds, I'm rewarded for playing into the flavor of that archetype. However, if I need to, I was wrong, you're kind of punished for being a bad Scryer, and it doesn't scale as much. So I think that could be a really fun way to play into it because it's tactical, right? But in your predicting or fortune telling through a crystal ball, which is kind of like, the focus of a Scryer, like in fortune teller, kind of in fantasy and other such things. Or maybe, what if another utility for the Scryer is that they can be aware of things on the minimap, whether they're POIs, which stands for points of interest, dungeon entrances, maybe mobs, level of mobs. Like, what if they could find that information out on their minimap, and then anybody who's an ally, they could then share it with them. So that's kind of like the scrying over the map with the little pendulum trying to find somebody's point of interest. What if they could do that? Wouldn't that be cool to have a utility spell that affected not only your map, but maybe your ally's map? That could be an interesting way to explore it, as well as just focusing on the predicting or the fortune telling, is instead of that battle res like I just talked about, if they had a preventative measure, if they had like an invulnerability for X amount of time measure, because in my mind that means they're like, if I was fortune telling, like, oh, a big hit's about to come, boom, preventative, or whatever you want to call it, golden body, come up with a cool name, but you go bam, and then the big hit hits that should have killed them, or they're almost dead anyway, and you prevent it, and they don't die, gives you time to heal them, or somebody else time to heal them. Is that the same as battle res? No. I'm conflicted on this after the kind of monologue I had on the beginning about battle res. I don't quite know if having alternatives to battle res would be as strong as a battle res, or if having this preventative X amount of invulnerability time would actually make them as popular as, say, a high priest who I think should have a battle res, right? Would everybody pick the high priest over the Scryer? Even though they might enjoy the Scryer playstyle, it just doesn't have the battle res, so they'd have to pick the high priest. I don't want to create that situation. But playing into the crystal ball, playing into the delaying of abilities that then go off and reward you for predicting right and things like that, feels like it would give the archetype identity. It would also give it a fun playstyle, in my opinion, and it rewards you for playing into a Scryer. All right, so let's move into the high priest. So that's where you double down on Cleric. I think this one is the most easy, I hate for it to be really boring, but I don't want to use the word heal bot because I really hate that phrase because it makes it feel like you have no other choice. But I really think they would lean into, being in a full-on clothy, less armor, maybe less health, trade-off being that their heals and their buffs are much stronger, right? Kind of like a glass cannon, but a healer? So, larger healers, maybe they have access to different types of heals, whether they're HOTS or AoE heals or just giant buff or giant bomb heals. I definitely think they should have the battle res, bringing somebody back to life. But they could also have like a divine intervention situation or like maybe an avatar of their divinity where they, kind of feeling like, I can't remember who it was. It must have been a holy priest. When they died, they turned into like a thing and they could heal better, or they could continue healing after death, or anything to that effect. I think would be really cool. Something that really rewards them for taking the risk of being super squishy. Something that really gave them like a divine appearance. They could go into it for a short time. I actually just watched an episode of Vox Machina where Pike astral projected and she was like shiny and holy and was able to like cast super damaging healing spells and heal like crazy and buff. Something like that, but mainly the buff and the healing. I think it'd be really cool, and that would play to the people who just want a full support class. I out heal tons of people. I can out buff. We can tackle most things above our level because of my abilities. And if I go into my divine intervention or whatever you want to call it, then I'm really touched by one of the deities, and I'm ready to go. I think it might not be as interesting to most people, but I think for the people that it would be, letting them feel like a really empowered divine healer could be a good way to do it, and I'm kind of a fan. So then we go to Templar, so the Cleric and the Fire. I was thinking, Cleric can already be in melee, right, like I said in the beginning, and then you add on Fighter, so you're increasing their ability to melee. They have more gap closers and such. So I think maybe they're self-healing, or maybe they had a passive that made healing that they cast on themselves do a percentage more. That way I could still heal other people. However, when I chose to heal myself, I got a bigger heal, or I got a bigger buff, because it's just rewarding me for keeping myself alive while being in the combat and being up front, most likely taking more damage and needing to dish out more damage. Maybe you could, if you cast a buff or a heal on yourself, it could radiate outwards. And what that would do was heal on a small AoE around you in order to kind of reward the party for playing around the fact that their healer is going to be right up front in the fray and could possibly be taking an enormous amount of damage. Hold on one second, I'm sorry. Okay, cool. So, I'm all about, you'll hear me say this, and if you haven't watched my other videos, check it out. Kind of my long-standing stance is not only archetype identity, but I want the kits or the abilities or however they're going to really bring life to these archetypes. I want it to reward the player for playing in the playstyle. If possible, reward the party for allowing the player to play the playstyle and the play loop that really brings out the best of the archetype. And I think by radiating the heals outside of the Templar, not necessarily in a large AoE, too much, but out of a little AoE, would then reward the party for going, you know what, let's pick our healer to be a melee healer. Okay, well, how do you reward them for making that choice? Allowing that player who chose the Templar to really shine. What if every time they healed themselves, it radiated out? And now it could radiate it out at a smaller percentage of healing? Sure. Because, a majority of it's going on them. We had talked about a buff to their self-healing and self-buffs, right? But it radiates out. So if that's the case, while it radiates out at a minor, it's still a heal. It's still rewarding not only the Templar for being up front and healing themselves, that play style, that play loop, but it's rewarding the players who want to play alongside that by being up front with them and healing them as well. I think that could be a really neat way to do it. Another idea was that the longer that they were in melee range of a target, or the longer they were dealing melee damage to a target, up to a cap, maybe it stacks, I'm not entirely sure the best way from a programming or a development standpoint, but they get a buff that builds as they're in combat, or in melee combat, or within range of a target. That way, if they're fighting for long periods of time, and they're building up his stacks, and then they go, oh shit, I need a heal, or oh shit, they need a heal, and they heal, it benefits, again, it's a bigger heal because of the stacks or the buff, but it's benefiting the cleric to be in battle, to really focus on fighting, focus on combat, and then turning around and healing. They're not losing as much. Now you run the risk of they drop a big heal on this guy because they waited to heal, but it was too late and that person dies anyway, or, there's still risk reward in that model. However, it still plays really heavily into the archetype's identity, as well as rewarding those around them for allowing them to play that. So interesting. I think it could be done. I don't think it's too over the top or complicated in my mind. Again, I know nothing about game development or game design, so take that what I say with a grain of salt. So let's move on. So then we go to the Oracle. Now it's interesting to me because Oracles the last time I played an Oracle in a TTRPG, they were very super squishier than a Cleric for sure, way in the back, and casting spells where they're like a mage but holy. You know what I mean? But if we port over the augment system that Ashes wants to put in, or Intrepid wants to put in Ashes of Creation. The mage is a secondary supposed to augment your abilities with a school of magic. The schools are like fire, I think fire, ice, no, is it arcane? Fire, ice, earth, lightning, and space, or teleport, or time, something like that. So how would we kind of put those in there? And in my mind, it was, how could I alter the cleric abilities with elemental schools and make them interesting and really give life to this archetype called Oracle? Initially, I thought maybe your heals were like a percentage weaker, but any damaging abilities were a percentage stronger, playing into the fact that you already had some damaging abilities as a cleric. However, as a mage, you're really coming in with this high-powered, you're bringing in the big guns, right, when it comes to casting spells. But then I was like, oh, well, what if the whole, like, your Holy Fire, if you had a Holy Fire ability, but you augment it with the Fire School. Now your Holy Fire is really doing holy damage and fire damage. Your Holy Shot could actually have lightning damage and do paralysis. Or maybe, depending on the augment you choose, it augments, for lack of a better word, all of your abilities. And what I mean by that is, say I heal somebody and my augment is lightning or electric or whatever they call it. When I heal them, the electric that's augmenting my abilities kind of surges through their body. It would stimulate their muscles or what have you. But what it does in reality is it heals them and gives them a small agility buff and movement speed buff. What if we kind of went that route with them? If you did fire, maybe it could burn up within them and it could help dispel something. The holy fire added to your heal now burns away any curses or burns away any debuffs. Or maybe their attacks, whether melee or ranged, now have a dot of some sort on them. You could augment your healing spells that way so that you could still do damage, right? You're still casting your damage spells, and while your healing spells do less damage, because we'll say you're a more damage, like range damage focused priest, you're not necessarily punished because your heals are less as a healer, but your heals are less but have more benefit. If we go to a high priest, let's just use superfluous numbers, and they cast a single heal, maybe it does 200 health. Well, when you cast that same heal, same level, everything, it only does 120. It's 80 less health. However, because of this augment, it also gives them a dexterity movement speed bonus, or it gives them a dot on their attacks, and you just decursed? What am I trying to say? Broke a curse on your attacker, saving their butt. You know what I mean? So while you're losing the healing ceiling, the ceiling of your heals, you're getting a bunch of extra additions to your cast. So, how do you balance that so that it's still fun and still viable? Hey, we're not going to, in this fight, we don't want to bring a lot of supports. We really only want to bring one support. So I need you to heal and buff at the same time, or heal and debuff at the same time, and then you're like, oh, well, actually I'm an oracle, so I could fit that role. You can't be a glass cannon necessarily. You can't be a high priest. I need some, I need other buffs. I don't need to just be healed. Oh, well, if I go fire, I can do this and it'll get dots. And they're weak to fire, so now all your attacks do extra damage. It gives utility to the oracle. And being somebody, or being a cleric archetype that has additional elemental effects, well, I heal less, but I'm buffing you with like cool attack speed buffs and things as well, on top of whatever buffs the cleric has. And then my attacks themselves do more damage. It seems like a really cool and different playstyle, and it could be really specific to the oracle, giving it archetype identity. All right, so next, let's see. This was another idea I had when I was going through this, is what if, depending on your archetype, it could affect the weight of your stats. And what I mean by that is, so let's just use basic stuff here. So I need a high wisdom to heal effectively. Wisdom directly affects my spell power, healing power, what have you. Now say that I go into a class such as Cleric Fighter, so I go to the Templar. Maybe now, instead of 100% of my wisdom going to my healing, maybe, 60%, 70% goes to my healing, and the other 30 or 40% goes to my attack, whether it be, strength-based or dex-based or what have you. By changing the stat weights or the stat bonus distribution, it could then play further into whatever archetype you choose. Now, that's probably way more difficult to do, but it was another way I feel like you could play with base systems and mechanics that are already in place behind the scenes, and you could alter and adjust them in order to add to archetype identity. That way, you can still, as a cleric, you can still stack a lot of wisdom stats. That way, no matter what archetype you are, you still have your wisdom. However, when you choose an archetype, the wisdom bonus distribution or stat weight, I'm not sure if that's the right word to use or phrase, it helps change with your archetype and giving you, it doesn't penalize you for stacking wisdom, which you need to do as a cleric no matter what kind of cleric you are, right? But it then changes its distribution so that you are more effective as your archetype, and you're not penalized, right, for playing into being a cleric primary. Just a thought. Okay, so then we go to cleric and ranger, so the protector. This one here is, rangers. We saw the range combat. I loved it. It looked great. But the ranger traps, things like that, how survivability, mobility, things you think about when you think about a ranger, how do you merge that with a cleric? So I was thinking about maybe this one, just because the name's protector, maybe it goes really hard into shield, similar to a disc priest. And that's kind of where I was. Like, what if this protector was more of a disc priest? You're healing, but you're mainly preventing damage and also doing damage as well. Maybe your holy spells could do a little bit more damage. Hold on, what did I put here? I'm sorry. Oh, I'm reading the wrong one. No wonder. Oh, okay. So the thought was that protector, right? So I need to heal, I need to protect. So say I put out shields, whether it be from just casting them, or maybe I lay like health packs or ration packs or holy symbols on the ground and people walk into them, kind of playing off that trap idea. And it goes off and it heals them, or it puts a shield on them. Well, because I'm going this disc priest route in my kind of theory of this class, what if the more shields I had out, or the more damage my shields prevent, no matter who they're on, that way if I'm solo it still works, it builds up a meter, or it builds up stacks, or what have you, and when, and the higher it goes, the more damage I do. So I'm being rewarded for damage by the amount of shields or the amount of damage I'm preventing is directly correlating to the amount of damage I'm doing. I don't know how you would balance that or if that would even work, but again, it's rewarding the playstyle of making sure I prioritize shielding and protecting my allies or myself. By prioritizing that, which is kind of the main focus of this class, I'm then rewarded by being able to do some DPS. Now, I'm not going to be able to out DPS a full DPS class or anything, obviously, but I'm able to do more than another cleric archetype if I manage my shields and my heals and my positioning and keeping my shields on the ground, or my, what was I calling them, the traps or the holy symbols on the ground. By managing all of that, I'm rewarded by being able to do a little bit more damage, or a lot of bit more damage, whatever. I think that would be really neat. It would play into, I think, the ranger idea, as well as the name protector, and playing into the cleric. So that could be another interesting way to do it. After that, you get the cleric and the rogue, which is the shadow disciple. So my thought with this was really kind of interesting. It was perhaps when you pick this archetype, all of a sudden all your divine power and your aesthetic comes from the void. Now, just stay with me. Or the ancients, if you did that, could you play a character that aesthetically was perceived as evil? Did you, just because your power is drawn from bad places, does that make you evil? That's I guess that's more of a morality issue. I'm not looking to get into that. But if you were a good-hearted, I don't know, maybe you're a good-hearted person, or you're just not a shitty person. Maybe you're not a great person, but you're not a shitty person. And you were a warlock, in D&D or Pathfinder or whatever, and you drew from a patron who was inherently evil. They want to corrupt you and do all this, but maybe you had a weak spot, moment of revenge. Can a decent player have a evil patron, or can their power be drawn from a place of perceived evil, or the home of evil, and then do well? Really interesting dynamic, a really cool duality for the character. But anyway, so let's say we lean into that void. Maybe all my healing spells now don't target people, like allies, but I can heal my opponents doing damage. Could be an interesting thing, kind of Shadow Priest, let's be real. Kind of a flip on going Shadow form or whatever. But I think you could pretty much lean into that idea as a Shadow Priest from WoW and Shadow form and all that, but kind of flavor it with the void. It would be cool to have some dots, things like that. And then while you could still heal, I think it would be neat to draw the life force out of your opponents, and then that life force you draw out could heal somebody. So it's like, say I mark my tank, and then I go do my void healing, which is now damaging enemies, and the amount of damage I do is returned back to my target. So it's returned back to my tank. Or if I do an AoE spell that does AoE damage, maybe then it AoE heals around my mark. Same thing. So I'm doing damage and healing at the same time. Lesser healing, right? My healing's down a little bit, but I'm still healing and my damage is higher. And with this void thing, now I'm casting spells, but it has to be I have to manage my mark, where I put my holy symbol, who I put my holy symbol on. I have to manage how much damage I'm putting out around who's healing, but I would also still need to be able to drop heals and everything on people. And again, I'm kind of leaning into some elements and theories or aesthetics from the Shadow Priest and WoW, but I think it can make a really neat and unique archetype. Okay, so then we're going to go to the Cleric or the Shaman. Cleric and Summoners make Shaman. But I do want to do one quick segue. I'm big into like brand new abilities or a brand new resource system for an archetype to make it feel good, but I feel like that's a lot of development time, or maybe it's harder to balance. But like I stated, with like changing their abilities from healing to damaging, like could they just change the way your abilities work? Instead of giving me a brand new set of abilities, what if they just augmented, with the augmented class? What if they just augmented your abilities? Just the best example I have is the one I just said. You go from holy to the void, powers your divine abilities or your supernatural abilities, and now your healing spells now do damage. It seems like that might, again, I don't know, but it might be easier to deal with than having to program a whole new resource system and how it works, or programming brand new abilities and actions that would make the archetype unique. I'm not sure. If you know, let me know, or whatever you think about it. All right, so let's jump into the Shaman. So I think this is one of those archetypes I've talked about a couple times. It's going to be really hard for Intrepid Studios to tell me how a Shaman works, when in my mind, the only Shaman I can really think of is the one from WoW, and I know how that works, right? Mostly totems, building around totems and elemental damage. So knowing that I have that pretty set in stone perception of what a Shaman is, it's going to be difficult for Intrepid and Steven to tell me what it should be. So I had to really think about it. Like, do we get damage, or do we get totems? Do we get elemental damage? So I started looking up Shamans, and a lot of the descriptions for the Shaman class in various tabletops is just their ability to commune with spirits, whether they be elemental spirits or dead spirits of different humanoid creatures. And what I thought about was, okay, so what if you summon spirits? You're a summoner. But what if you sent those spirits into your allies or into yourself to buff and heal them? The idea being like, I summon a spirit of earth. And while it's not necessarily a summon that goes out and fights for me, I summon this big spirit of earth. Maybe as soon as it comes in, it does like I summon it and it busts out like a shield on everybody. And then I have to push that ability again on a target, and it goes and it inhabits that target for X amount of time, which shields them and buffs them. Or maybe it heals them. And the same with different spirits of nature. But it doesn't have to be all these different elementals, which I think would probably be a big play. It could be like, oh, well, I'm going to summon the spirit of a mighty warrior. I'm going to summon the spirit of a shaman or a healer or whatever. And you summon the spirit of a divine being or a different animal or something, right? And then you let that inhabit somebody and it buffs them. Like maybe you summon a fallen warrior. You have it go inhabit your warrior, and now he's got better reflexes, or what am I saying? Better reflexes would be like flavor-wise, but like they get a small buff to movement speed or dodge chance, or maybe their stamina. If we use stamina to roll or block, maybe it increases so they can block extra or roll extra. I really think it'd be neat to play with that spiritual communion idea of a shaman, and I think that would allow you to play with not only the elemental spirits, but the occasional cool, like summon a fallen hero or a fallen warrior thing, and really play into it. And then having them like be summoned and do a thing, and then go inhabit somebody to buff them, as well as your typical cleric healing, I think could be an interesting way to do it. I think it'd be cool to see. I think it'd be cool to play. I think the archetype itself could be really unique and have that identity if you really play around it. Having the ability to summon these guys and then inhabit various allies to give them buffs and healing. Okay, so then we come to the end, which is where the cleric and the tank meet, which is the apostle. So apostle itself is like a pretty heavily, the word is pretty heavily rooted in religion or, yeah, religious context, right? So I'd love to see that with not only this archetype, but potentially with the cleric in general, being able to choose one of the deities, right? One of the big gods. And while I don't think they should necessarily augment your abilities or give you certain abilities or buffs, because then you would have a metaform where, oh, well, clerics are really only one of these two gods, depending on what archetype you are. But I would like you choosing the deity to change your aesthetic. Maybe some of your abilities have a slightly different color. Or when I theory crafted and I said, like, oh, you put your holy symbol here or there, or you summon your holy symbol, like, what if the symbols change on your abilities depending on what deity you picked? Seems small, but it also seems like an interesting choice for a cleric to have to make. And especially like for an apostle, like some of their abilities I thought about, kind of theory crafted, involved around using their holy symbol. But what if that holy symbol changed depending on what god they pledged allegiance to? You know, it doesn't have a significant impact on the play style of the cleric. But when it comes to role playing, or when it comes to aesthetics, or just player choice when making a cleric, I feel like it's like one additional step or one additional choice they get to make that kind of makes their character unique to them. Could be cool. Might be a pain in the ass, but could be cool. So then I went into, okay, so how would apostle work? So like I said, I really want to lean into them like representing their deity. So lots of abilities using like marks. So their deity's symbol, right? Maybe they put the mark on the ground and whoever's on the mark activates similar to a rune of power, I think from Arcane Mage and WoW. If you're on it and you cast, things are better. If your target is on it and you cast, your damage does more, or maybe your healing does more to the people that are on the mark or in the circle the mark creates, you know, however you want to do that. I think you could play hard into the chastisement too, you know, self-chastisement. And what I mean by that is like, what if I took, the more damage I took, it heals those around me. So instead of just casting heals, maybe I focus on being up front, being a tank, right? Being in the fray, and the more damage I take, the more healing it does to those around me, kind of rewarding me for taking damage and playing the tank role, right? If you hear that, that's my son. He's waking up for his nap, so I'm gonna try to wrap this up. Maybe you don't wear as heavy of armor. That way you take more damage, but the damage is then converted to healing. Now, when it comes to you, how would you stay alive? I said maybe that you took damage over time. You know, like you have like a divine protection. So if I took 100 damage, instead of taking 100 up front, I take 70 or 80 and I take 20 over time. Similar to, I think, how Brewmaster works. Sorry, guys. But yeah, that was it. You know, take some, and I was talking about a close relationship with your deity, wearing lighter armor. It could be a really interesting way to build a cleric tank hybrid. I'm going to wrap this up because he's just going to keep screaming. Thank you again for watching this. I hope you guys have a great day. Like, subscribe, and do all that. Let me know what you think about the cleric archetypes down below, and I hope you guys have a great day, and thanks for stopping by.